What up, Misfits? Welcome to the Misfit Heroes podcast. My name is Chris, and together we are going on a journey. All right, I mentioned it in a previous episode, but a lot of you all have been asking about how to start your own podcast. And aside from some random Google searches, it seems like a lot of people have had some trouble figuring out how to start their own podcast in 2023. But fear not, it's actually really easy, and you don't have to be a tech guru to do it. So, here's my quick and easy guide for how to start a podcast of your own.
Playing the Misfit Heroes podcast.
Okay, now before I get started on how to do this yourself, I thought you should know how a podcast actually works. I know that not everybody is going to care about this, but I think if you have this information first up front, it'll save you some headaches later on down the road that most people don't expect. So, what is a podcast? A podcast is nothing more than a list of downloadable audio files, usually in MP3 or WAV format. It uses what is called an RSS feed, which is really just a list that checks for new changes on random intervals. When a user wants to listen to your podcast, they go to their preferred podcast platform, they search for your podcast, and the RSS feed is what displays your episodes to them. Now, I won't go into how the specifics of how the RSS feed works in this video, but just know that your RSS feed is your podcast. Without it, your podcast won't get published anywhere. So, how do you get your RSS feed out there? Well, there are a number of podcast hosting platforms that'll put your podcast out on the internet and control your podcast RSS feed for you. These include paid services like Buzzsprout, Libsyn, and Podbean, and free services like Anchor, which is now Spotify for podcasters, and Red Circle Core, which is a free podcasting platform with tiered payment levels for your growing needs. Now, for the purpose of this episode, I'm going to be focusing on the free service Anchor, mainly just to show that there is minimal barrier to entry, and that this is something that anyone can do. Now, before you ask, this is not a sponsorship. While I'd love for them to pay me some money, they ain't doing it yet. I use Anchor because it's free. That's it. While it's a great platform and offers a ton of features with minimal effort, there are some major downsides. The best reason I can say to use Anchor is, one, that it is free, but it's also simple. You can create your podcast directly from an app on your phone, and it automatically submits your podcast to the 9 top podcasting platforms by default out of the box. It's actually a fairly simple program to use, and you can record your podcast directly in the Anchor app on your smartphone or on their website as well. Anchor also allows you to upload video podcasts to Spotify, which is a major bonus over some of these other free platforms. There's also analytics, which I will admit are very flawed. And it's also worth noting that none of these free options I speak about are IAB compliant, which without fully explaining that, it means that these services are not transparent in showing your actual analytics numbers. Now, why would that matter? Well, let's say your podcast grows and you'd like to make money from potential ad sponsorships. Many advertisers won't work with a podcaster who's not IAB certified, so that they can prove how many listeners are actually coming to your podcast. Some things to note. It's great that Anchor is free. However, whenever I see that a product is given to you for free, you should know that you are considered the product. You don't own your RSS feed with any of these free platforms. When Anchor or Red Circle submit your podcast RSS feed to Apple Podcasts, for example, the RSS is owned by Anchor. For example, my RSS address begins with anchor.fm / a bunch of random numbers and letters. So these free platforms are great when you're starting out, but you'll probably want to switch to another provider once you start growing a little bit. And you can do that with what's called a 301 redirect, which is minimally complicated, and these free platforms actually make it fairly painless to do so. So you can always switch around later if you choose to do that. And this is another reason I recommend free podcasting platforms to new podcasters. If you decide that podcasting isn't for you, you haven't dropped $20 a month to figure it out. I'm obviously not going to cover how to do all that in this episode, but it's just something that you should know. And if you'd like to see how to do that, comment down below and let me know. Heck, while we're on the subject, if you have any questions, comment those too, and I'll be sure to help you out. Now, another cool feature about Anchor is that since they're owned by Spotify, if you want to use music from the Spotify platform, you can do that without any copyright risk, at least on the Spotify platform. Most of these platforms offer free and unlimited hosting, which means you don't have to pay every time somebody downloads an episode of your podcast. Now, I know someone out there is wondering, hey, why can't I host my own RSS feed out on the internet somewhere? Well, the short answer is yes, you can, but in my experience, it's going to be quite expensive. Now, last time I checked, it was about 7 cents US dollars per download to do this yourself. It's very complicated to do, so you'll need in-depth tech and coding knowledge. And while 7 cents doesn't seem too expensive, let's calculate it out. I'll use myself as an example. At the time of this recording, I've had 27,000 plus downloads this month on YouTube. Using my handy dandy calculator right here, that would have cost me roughly $1,890 this month alone. Those numbers make giving your data to Swedish tech billionaires over at Spotify almost seem worth it, doesn't it? Almost. Now that we know what a podcast is and how to get it to the internet, let's start recording and upload a show. As I mentioned, you can use Anchor to record and upload directly from the app on your phone, which is really convenient and nifty. Now, for the interest of full disclosure, you should know this about recording from your phone. It's going to sound like you recorded on your phone. When I do an episode, I use an audio interface right there. I use headphones for monitoring sound and much better microphones than what is on your phone. And this obviously makes a difference to your listener. But I want to show that literally anyone can do this. And you got to start somewhere. But if I were going to be serious about podcasting, I would upgrade my equipment. And that doesn't have to be crazy expensive either. More on that in a later episode. For the purposes here, let's record an episode. To do this, you simply open up the Anchor app, hit the plus button conveniently centered down at the bottom of the screen, and hit the record button. It's as simple as that. When you're finished recording, type in some details about what your episode is about, you hit save, and you hit publish. And you've now got a podcast published out on the internet. Now, there's some other things to worry about, like creating podcast artwork and submitting your RSS feed to other platforms outside of those 9 that Spotify offers, which I can cover in a later episode. But that's basically it. You've done it. So you now have no excuse not to start a podcast. It's literally that easy. If you guys have any questions or there's anything you'd like more insight on from someone who's been doing this for roughly about 4 years now, let me know in the comments down below. Thanks again for listening. Please be sure to leave a rating and review of the show on Apple Podcasts and YouTube. And as always, be kind, love one another, and be a hero.